Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by Inside the Penguins, a proud affiliate of the Hockey News. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. We got a good show for you guys today because, well, I'm intrigued to see what the Pittsburgh Penguins decide to do with Jesse Puljujarvi. He's coming off of a pretty decent season, coming off of double hip surgery, and then he had a decently successful World Championships over in Prague. So we'll talk about what's next for Jesse Puljujarvi next season with the Penguins. And then a little bit of news. Seattle Kraken hire a former Pittsburgh Penguins bench boss. We'll talk about that and what it means for the Penguins assistant coaching search. And we'll close it out with a wrap-up of the IIHF World Championships as they came to a conclusion on Sunday afternoon. But Horwat, let's start with Jesse Puljujarvi. Signed for one more year at $800,000 to the Pittsburgh Penguins. He scored 3 goals and 4 total points in 22 games played this past season, but really, interestingly, caught a lot of healthy scratches from Mike Sullivan and company. The question that I have for you going into next season, with obviously a lot of time left in this offseason to see who comes in, who goes out, is there, some fat trimmed around the top of the Penguins lineup, and is there more opportunity given to young players? Is Jesse Puljujarvi's roster spot at the NHL level up for grabs, at least as of right now, looking into next season?
It just might be. And I think that goes, and that lends to the fact that he was healthy scratched quite a bit during the regular season, because whenever he did play, everyone continued to say that he looked good. He looked like a solid piece for the depth. He looked like he could score on occasion, that he was skating really well considering what he had to go through in the offseason, and that he was just playing his way through such a weird end of the season for the Penguins. I mean, he kind of had to deal with guys coming up over him, guys getting sick around him, and then going on a hot run without him in the lineup, and then pretty much just having to sit through that, and then coming in the lineup and contributing at certain points during that stretch as well. So I don't know what the proper position for him is in this upcoming season, considering everything that I just laid out. Me personally, I would say he should be starting bare minimum on the third line and going from there. But who knows what happens, considering the Penguins want to bring up young guys. Like, he's not one of them, by the way. He's also only 26 or 27. He's got youthful energy that he can bring to this team, and I think he fits a lot of things that the Penguins need. I don't want to say they're ignoring it. I just think maybe they want to see more somewhere, and it's just up to him to prove it. And who knows, maybe it was just because it was a 2-year deal that they signed him to. Maybe there was an expectation that that first year was just going to be a trial run, a get your feet wet, played some time in the AHL, and got some NHL playing time in. Who knows what he would have done had they made the postseason? Who knows where he would have slotted in there, because maybe, up against the Rangers, who knows? Maybe that's the sort of defensive-minded forward that they could have used in that sort of situation. But I'd say it's up to him to earn the spot. And maybe next season he's going to be a full-timer. Just needed some runway.
Yeah, it's weird because you would think that he kind of fits the mold as a Mike Sullivan guy, right? He has pretty good foot speed for a big guy. He's over 6'4", I believe. He's over 200 pounds. He plays like he's over 200 pounds and 6'4", unlike a guy like Radim Zohorna. So he's physical, he's good on the forecheck, and he's defensively responsible while having a little bit of offensive upside. The one thing that he doesn't do is finish, and that's been the book on Jesse Puljujarvi ever since he was drafted 4th overall to the Edmonton Oilers. But it's weird because where we sit now, to me, he feels like a fallback option for the Penguins. Like, he feels like, all right, we're going to try to give these young guys opportunities, because you look at the top of the Penguins lineup, specifically on the right side, it's Brian Rust, it's Rickard Rakell, and like we said, this is before we find out if Kyle Dubas makes any moves with anybody, particularly, a guy like Rickard Rakell. But those two you would imagine are starting the year 1-2 on the right side. But then are you going to give a young guy a shot at that third line right wing position? A guy like maybe a Valtteri Puustinen, a guy like Ville Koivunen, a guy like Vasily Ponomarev, a guy like, who knows, maybe Braden Yeager starts on the wing in his NHL career. Are you going to give them a shot there? And if that's the case, The only spot left on the NHL roster is fourth line center, which right now we're talking about it as if that should be Nola Chari's spot, as in what Jeff Carter had this past season, where, hey, that's your spot. That's where you're staying. As long as you're healthy, you're there. Right. And unless we need another center, you're there. So it feels like he's kind of a fallback option for if these players aren't ready for the big time yet. And that's a weird position to be in for a guy that when he played this past season, I was impressed with. I'm not going to say he's a guy that deserves to have the roster spot no matter what, but I thought he played well, and I was confused as to why he was getting healthy scratched when he was. I was on this show questioning whether or not he was fully recovered from the double hip surgery, and the Penguins were adamant that he was, and it was just lineup decisions as to why he wasn't in the lineup. Going into next season, it feels like he's taking a back seat to some of these younger guys, and my question is just, why? Right? He's a bigger body, he's a physical presence, and he's something that the Penguins don't have much of in the bottom six, which is physicality with speed, with a little bit of scoring touch, and I'm just not sure why. It seems like they're reluctant to use him to his full capacity.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I'm with you. It just doesn't seem like they're getting on his train yet. When he plays, I keep looking at the stat line. Like, yeah, the offensive numbers aren't there, but I think Kyle Dubas said when they signed him and they brought him on, they weren't expecting too much offense from him. If they got it, it was just going to be an added bonus to his game. If I remember the quote, that's pretty much what it sounded like. He didn't take a ton of penalties. I think there's 6 penalty minutes on his ledger here. I think 1 or 2 of them may have been bad timing. Maybe that leads into it, because on a team that had a good penalty kill, but as the season progressed, it kind of deflated a bit. You don't want to be taking bad penalties late in the season. Other than that, though, 40 hits, 22 games, he was clearly unafraid to toss his body around quite a bit. And that's that average time on ice, 9 minutes and 11 seconds. It's so interesting looking at what he was unable to accomplish this year, but also still doing so much in very little time given. When they initially brought him in on the tryout, it seemed like he could very much help the depth, very much add a ton of aspects of offense, a ton of aspects of defense, but they never gave him that opportunity. And I think, and I'm hopeful that maybe it was just giving him runway this season to build himself up. We're gonna rest him. We're gonna give him some playing time here and there, let him rest, and then looking forward to next season, where it hopefully could be all things go, where it is just full throttle. So that's what I'm looking forward to, at least. And when it comes to Puljujarvi, I'm hopeful that he can enter training camp and enter the preseason ready to earn his spot, and then hopefully play 82 for the first time in his career.
Yeah, obviously with the Penguins' injury history just in general, that would be a nice little piece to the middle six, because I think a lot of the conversation is him as just a bona fide bottom six guy, but I feel like he's a middle six guy. And that brings us to this last little tidbit before we move over and talk about, obviously Dan Bylsma and the Pittsburgh Penguins and Seattle Kraken and their coaching searches and where that goes. But could you see the Penguins using him in the top six? Because you mentioned maybe it's like a get your feet wet, try to see what's working, because it didn't seem like he was really nailed down to a line, or even, as Mike Sullivan likes to do, he wasn't nailed down with a partner, somebody that, wherever he went, the other guy went, even when there was roster changes. Because you look at his time on ice and who he played with. Yeah, it was majority bottom six. He played 22% of his 5-on-5 ice time in the top six, 78 in the bottom six. But you look at the line mates he had in the bottom six. He was on the third line with Eller. He was on the third line with Bemstrom. He was on the fourth line with Carter. He was on the fourth line with Poulin at points. He was on the fourth line with Nola Chari at points. He really bounced around the lineup and bounced with different line mates. So there really wasn't a chance for him to kind of settle down and get some chemistry in a new organization with a bunch of different new faces. So I'm curious as to why his utilization was like that, and whether or not it was just, this is where the Penguins are at. If you can't do it right now, we can't have you doing it, because as we saw, the Penguins only could have afforded to lose one game in regulation down the stretch, and it cost them everything. So maybe it was part of, the situation as well.
Yeah, that's possible. And when it comes down to it, he wasn't able to build that chemistry with anyone. And going forward, I don't know if top six is going to be an option, because like you said, Mike Sullivan likes those pairings. He just didn't pair with anyone. He'd be in a Malkin line situation. He'd be the third guy, and then that we all know that position kind of changes quite a bit. I think Michael Bunting is going to be stapled to Malkin for quite a bit this upcoming season. I could see Puljujarvi slotting in there a couple of times, but nothing that we would look at and go, that's the permanent line. So I would say if Puljujarvi is able to build a chemistry with maybe that's Sam Poulin as a third line option, maybe that Jesse Puljujarvi or Valtteri Puustinen on the other side of that, maybe that line gets formed and causes nightmares for writers. There's all different sorts of options that can happen with Puljujarvi, considering the amount of change that is once again expected from the bottom six. But it's not so much change as it is young faces coming up. The bottom six should see a couple more shifts in terms of personnel, and Puljujarvi should be part of that. It just depends on who he builds that chemistry with and who he gets paired with.
Yeah, the best thing for Puljujarvi might be Sam Poulin emerging as a third-line center early next season, because him and Poulin and Puljujarvi, they had a really good run there at the American Hockey League level, and that was when Puljujarvi was still getting up to speed. And we talked about it, the pool party line. They had a lot of success at the American Hockey League level, so maybe that's the best thing for Puljujarvi, because he has some chemistry with Poulin. If they could do that going into next year's training camp, and they can kind of solidify 1-2 on the third pairing and the third line, that might be the best thing for Puljujarvi's, his career next season, especially if he wants to get opportunities with the Penguins. But I think it's going to be going through the offseason, especially getting into training camp, seeing where he slots in and who he's playing with, because we know early in training camp, Mike Sullivan just throws a couple things against the wall. He likes to pair, young guys high in the lineup. We've seen Puustinen play with Crosby in the first week of training camp, but there's always a little bit of a sense of, okay, he wants to see this because he wants to run with this early. O'Connor and Eller from the first day last year, those were a pairing. And if it wasn't for the top six and Riley Smith kind of bottoming out early, Drew O'Connor probably would have spent the entire season with Lars Eller, and you would have been in a pretty good situation. Who is that guy that, Puljujarvi ends up being put next to? Is it a Poulin? Is it Lars Eller? And they're like, all right, we want this to be the third line that works early in the season. So certainly something to monitor, and certainly an interesting position on the Penguins roster, because we talk about these young guys getting opportunities. Is it at the expense of Jesse Puljujarvi, and why? Right? I didn't think he was bad, but it's going to be something to monitor as the offseason continues. Yep. But let's move over and talk a little bit of news. This time, a Seattle Kraken hiring, as the coaching carousel is slowing down a little bit around the NHL. The Seattle Kraken hire former Pittsburgh Penguins bench boss Dan Bylsma. Obviously, Bylsma, the head coach of the Penguins for the 2009 Stanley Cup Championship. Also the third all-time Penguins head coach in games played, and also second all-time in wins in Pittsburgh Penguins history. Most recently, he's taken the Coachella Valley Firebirds of the American Hockey League deep into the Calder Cup playoffs last year, losing in the finals in their first season of existence, and this year set to begin the Western Conference Finals tomorrow against the Milwaukee Admirals. Bylsma, head coach in Seattle. Were you surprised at all about this? Because it felt like this is one of those, promotions from the AHL to the NHL that a lot of people saw coming.
Yeah, I think maybe I am surprised a bit, because he hasn't been in an NHL role in quite a while, and nothing's been announced yet, but also give Seattle a little time. They're 3 hours behind. And also with Coachella Valley still being in the playoffs, I don't know what the protocol will be for that. Maybe it's just, hey, the expectation is next season. Maybe there's still a formal announcement to be made. But everyone seems to have it that he'll be the next guy, and it makes sense. Whenever it comes down to it, it does make sense, because that team's going to likely have a ton of Coachella Valley faces in the lineup next season. And much like the Penguins did, I believe, with Dan Bylsma himself,
yes,
and Mike Sullivan, sometimes that hire, you bring up he knows the guys that they're bringing up. He knows what they're good at, what they can perform well in, and that should make Seattle a stronger team next year. I'm just shocked when it comes down to it, just because of the length that he's been out of the head coaching business for. At least he's been an assistant for, I think it was Detroit after his Buffalo days, and then ended up as an AHL coach for a couple of teams. So I think because he's just kind of been out of that realm for a while, that's what makes me curious about it. But I mean, I've also forgot just how successful of a coach he was. Obviously, winning a cup right away. He's the fastest coach in NHL history at the time. I don't know if it's been defeated since, to 200 wins in 2013. Nuts. And then became, I believe, again, the fastest to 250. I think that was the numbers he set. I'd have to double check those. So totally quote me on that, but that's what I remember looking into. He was a successful coach. Now, it was a different era of hockey, too. It was still sort of transitioning into this speed-based game that we know now. We'll see how it translates, but I think Seattle's probably a good team to do that with. There isn't a ton of his coaching style should fit Seattle. There's not a ton of superstar talent. There's great players there, but there is no standout. This guy alone can sell tickets. It is team by committee and win by committee, and that's something that he should do pretty well. And considering the superstars rumored in Pittsburgh and definitely in Buffalo did not like him.
Yeah, Buffalo was a failed experiment from the beginning, but Buffalo's been a failed experiment plenty of times. Good luck to Lindy Ruff up there with the Buffalo Sabres.
He's used to that one.
Yeah, he's used to it, so he should have a good opportunity. But speaking of the coaching carousel now, with Bylsma expected to sign on with the Seattle Kraken, that leaves one head coaching position available, and that is the San Jose Sharks. And with that, there's still plenty of significant coaches left on the market, Horwat. I mean, just off the top of my head, the four names that I came up with were guys like Jay Woodcroft, who coached that very successful power play in Edmonton. You have David Quinn, obviously, with the, Mike Sullivan connections. That's one of the names immediately that flew onto the Penguins' radar. Dean Evason out of Minnesota. And also Gerard Gallant, who took this past year off after being fired from the New York Rangers organization. Of those four, are any of them standing out to you as a possible assistant coach for the Penguins at the NHL level?
You have to know which ones are willing to take the decrease in role. And that was kind of part of why Sheldon Keefe likely didn't roll here. He just didn't want to take a step back from what he was doing. He wanted to continue being an NHL head coach, and he got that opportunity. I think David Quinn makes a ton of sense, if I got the name right, because I screw up the Quinns all the time.
Yeah.
But David Quinn makes a ton of sense and always has from the jump because of that relationship with Mike Sullivan, that ability to be a good coach, but not necessarily threaten a head coaching job. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy that would one day steal the job from Sullivan, at least in my eyes. So it's a good assistant pick for the Penguins. Honestly, if I had to throw my hat in the ring, if I had to put the money down, I'd say he might be the front runner. There hasn't been a ton of insider reporting on what's going on with the coaching search. We've gotten a singular name for the AHL spot, so there just hasn't been much going on. So I could say David Quinn might be, in my head, my favorite for that position to lock down as the assistant. That relationship with Sullivan is something, because you have to figure Sullivan is fiercely loyal to his assistants, always has been, and was loyal to Reardon up until the Penguins decided to say he's not returning. Why not soften the blow for Sullivan with a good buddy of his? And that makes Sullivan's job, or at least his mindset on the team, a little easier. And there's a sort of a pre-built relationship there dating back to the college days that see if it could work at the NHL level. I think that in my head is a good spot to go with.
I like the David Quinn one. There's a lot of connections there, and it's the easy, understandable hire. They bring in Sullivan's buddy to execute what Sullivan wants and his vision. But again, what have I said multiple occasions? You can't keep making Mike Sullivan comfortable.
Right.
And I think you need to bring in somebody with an air of, hey, this guy is a gunner. This guy has done it before. Dean Evason had a lot of success in Minnesota. So I really like the idea of a Dean Evason. Jay Woodcroft had a good bit of success in Edmonton. I like the idea of that. But my favorite of the four, and I think it makes some sense, is Gerard Gallant. This is a guy that has been a successful head coach in recent seasons. He had 2 really good years with the New York Rangers, just wasn't able to get them over the hump in the playoffs, and ultimately that was his demise there. But he was also a really good coach for Florida. He was also a really good coach for the Vegas Golden Knights, the first ever coach for the Vegas Golden Knights, if I'm not mistaken. And he was just unceremoniously dropped from a lot of these positions. One, that wouldn't happen in Pittsburgh. We see that they're loyal to their coaches to almost to a fault, at least so far under the Dubas regime. He took this past year off, and as we saw earlier this year when he was coaching the CHL Top Prospects game, he said he'd be happy to coach in the National Hockey League again. But with 3 positions most recently that he's been fired from, he's had a lot of success, but it seems like people are trying to go in different directions for head coaching jobs. And if he wants to coach in the NHL again, and he said he does, that might be the best route. Take an assistant gig, work your way up a little bit more, find some success as a power play coach, as a coach of the forwards or a coach of the defense or whatever. You split it and work your way back up into being a head coaching candidate. Not to mention the fact that I want some disruption here. I want Mike Sullivan to feel a little uncomfortable because as of right now, he seems like Mike Tomlin, somebody who's running that organization from the standpoint of where he's at, somebody that is a pillar in that standpoint and a pillar in that organization where it feels like he's secure. You need to, at the very least, rattle him a little bit, rattle his cage a little bit. And moving Todd Reardon on is not enough to do it if you replace him with his best buddy and his golfing buddy. So I think you bring in a guy like Gerard Gallant, somebody who has a reputation as being this bridge head coach for a lot of organizations. He was the bridge to what we see now with the New York Rangers. He was the bridge to what we see now with the Vegas Golden Knights. I believe they had Pete DeBoer between him and Bruce Cassidy, but he was the bridge to building that organization and building up some goodwill from the head coaching position. I think he could be that in Pittsburgh. And I think now with the head coaching searches kind of wrapping up, there's one position left.
Yep.
A lot of these coaches are going to be like, well, if I want to work next year, what is the best opportunity for me? And I think assistant with the Penguins and coaching guys like Crosby and Malkin on the power play, I feel like that would be high on their list because if they say, all I have to do is fix a power play that has a bunch of Hall of Famers, again, easier said than done.
Yep.
But at the same time, that's a pretty solid position to put yourself in if you want to work your way back into being a head coach. So I think Gallant, honestly, I think all 4 of these are names that would certainly be on the Penguins' radar. David Quinn more than most, but I think Gallant would be the best fit for the Penguins next season.
I can see that one too. I like I said, whenever I started this off, you just have to wonder if they want to work next year, just do they want to be an assistant? Are they willing to take that sort of step backwards? And maybe it is just part of their process, but it's just a curious case of what are they as coaches also willing to do? But if that opportunity is there, and you're right, it's especially if they can maybe get a guy that's, you never know what kind of contract are the Penguins looking to hand out here too. Maybe they're looking for a guy that's, here's a 1-year deal as someone like a Gerard Gallant, who you're going to get a 1-year deal here. You can, as a show me deal, like a player, here's a 1-year show me contract. If you're good and if you like the role you're in, we'll extend you afterwards. If you're good and other teams want to hire you as a head coach next year, by all means. And then it's a carousel. Then all of a sudden it turns to a little bit of a carousel for the Penguins. But at this point of Crosby, Malkin, Letang's career, are you honestly all that worried about an assistant coach sticking around for a couple of years? Because it seems like Mike Sullivan's going to stick around for another couple of years anyway. Just a little bit that goes into this one, that if it's a 1-year deal for an assistant, I don't think you're all that mad at it.
Yeah, I personally, I feel like it's going to be 2 for whoever gets it, because at the same time, coaches leave with a year left on their contract to get a head coaching job anyway.
Yep, there you go.
So I feel like there'd be a 2-year deal just for a little bit of security, especially for a guy in Gallant who right now is about 60 years old. I think he's 60 or 61. He just probably wants a little bit of security and doesn't want to be bopping around every other year or negotiating a contract every other year. But again, 3 of these 4 guys were fired mid-season from their last job as a head coach. The only other one that wasn't fired mid-season was David Quinn. He was fired late in the season.
Yeah.
So at the same time, do you want to be a head coach or do you want to be a coach at this stage of the game? To get back to being a head coach for guys like Quinn, Evison, Woodcroft, you probably have to take an assistant job. Gallant might be the one guy that is kind of like, all right, I don't need that. I've been a head coach for the past decade.
Yeah.
So I don't need to go back to being an assistant like I was, a little while ago. But, at the end of the day, that's going to start heating up because these head coaching positions are now gone, which means coaches, if they want to work, they're going to look into the assistant coaching positions. And the Penguins, I think, have, as I mentioned, one of the more attractive ones. Let's close this thing out by discussing the IIHF World Championships. They came to a close on Sunday afternoon with hometown Czechia taking out Switzerland 2-0 in the gold medal game. David Pastrnak scores the gold medal goal against Switzerland. So Czechia gets gold, Switzerland takes silver, Sweden takes home the bronze medal, and Canada goes medalless, 4th place at the World Championships. What are your final thoughts on 2024 Worlds, Horwat?
Good for Czechia. I know they've been a hockey powerhouse for quite a while, but this kind of really adds another level, another dimension to what they can do. Dave Pastrnak is obviously a monster in so many different areas. Players that get eliminated in the second round usually don't make that leap to that tournament just because of the timing. Things don't usually work out. But because it was in his native country, in his homeland, and he was able to perform in his couple of games, awesome stuff for that country. And they capped it off with obviously a gold medal and a championship that I cannot remember when the last time they did it was. It's probably been a while. They ended but a couple of teams and just through the whole tournament ended Canada's medal streak, which I think had gone on for quite a while. So my thoughts are overall good for Czechia, good for that country, good for those players. And boy, what did Canada do? They I always enter these tournaments as a strong favorite because of who they are, because of the kind of talent they often bring in. And then I mentioned Sweden being one of my favorites before. I'm not shocked they got a medal there. And Erik Karlsson had a very, very, very good tournament. And Switzerland also shocking quite a lot, right? Finishing in second with not many players, but also that's another one of those growing countries, a lot like Germany, where it's they have a couple of big names there, and just give it a couple years and they could be a strong competitor in all kinds of international tournaments.
Yeah, there was obviously a lot of storylines in this one. Czechia obviously taking the cake. Jaromir Jagr, which we'll get to, being in the front row seat, and by the front row, I mean what looked to be a huge luxury box in that arena in Prague. But also, you look for the Penguins side of things. Marcus Pettersson and Erik Karlsson looked really good together in this tournament. Pettersson finishes with 3 goals, 5 points in 10 games. Karlsson finishes with 6 goals and 11 points, in 10 games, and they take home the bronze medal. We mentioned them on Friday, 7-0 in the preliminary rounds, the only undefeated team. And then they win 1-0 over Finland in the quarterfinals. And you just looked at them and said, I'm not sure who's going to stop this team. I mean, you had Victor Hedman, you had Rasmus Dahlin, you had obviously the 2 Penguins on the back end, but even on the front end, you had a guy like Lucas Raymond coming off of a great year in Detroit. So I was a little shocked to see Czechia take them down in the manner that they did in the semifinals. Right, it was not a close game. Right, they were up, I think, 6-3 at one point in the third period. I was a little surprised by that, but at the same time, I mean, something about that hometown cooking and David Pastrnak, and obviously his center coming over from Boston as well, Pavel Zacha, who now, as you famously like to mention, has as many World Championship goals as he does NHL Stanley Cup playoff goals. But a great showing for Czechia, a great moment for Czechia. And the videos of the celebrations have been phenomenal already. Like Alex Ovechkin in Vegas celebrating a cup, phenomenal from David Pastrnak. So good for those guys.
It's such a weird tournament, right? Because it's not necessarily overly notable, but yet there's such a history with it that it's important for these European countries. It's important for these countries to participate and play well in it. And also winning gold there helps you get into the triple gold club. Like, it's such a weird middle ground tournament that obviously doesn't get the biggest names because of the NHL playoffs happening simultaneously. And also some of the biggest names like Sidney Crosby just deciding not to go. So the overall talent level obviously isn't there, but it gives other countries and other names opportunities to shine, i.e. Switzerland this year, or Andrei Burakovsky leading Sweden in scoring. Like, when's the last time he's had, not a relevant season, but when's the last time he really had his name shine like that? It's such an interesting tournament, which is also what makes it so entertaining. It's for the hockey hardcores. And seeing a gold, silver, bronze finish of Czechia, Switzerland, Sweden, that excuse me, cements it. That is such a interesting and entertaining tournament that is important and deserves more looks every year. And the Jágr of it all, like I said, it was perfect for that country specifically.
Yeah, and we mentioned Jaromir Jágr. He was inducted into the 2024 class of the IIHF Hall of Fame, just knocking down those Hall of Fames like dominoes at this point. A great month, a great year for Jaromir Jágr up to this point. And obviously we talked last Thursday about the Penguins working to bring him back in a semi-regular capacity, which would be great for the Penguins organization. But what a year for Jaromir Jágr. I mean, jersey retirement, the basically Beatles landing in America tour for him this season, and then the bobbleheads, and now of course his home team of Czechia coming in, winning Worlds at home, and then him of course announcing that he is nowhere close to being finished with his on-ice product. So the Kladno, I can't remember what the
Knights,
the Kladno Knights will continue to have their wily veteran suiting it up for whenever he can actually get out there and suit it up for. So big year for Jaromir Jágr. He continues to have a resurgence into the public eye in 2024.
Yeah, it's perfect for him. He's going to continue to play. Maybe he does find that ambassador type role that keeps him based in Czechia too. It's not like he needs to do a ton of travel outside of his home country, where he can continue playing over there and continue growing the Penguins brand over there, but also being a scout almost over there, seeing who can perform at an NHL level and giving them, recommendations. I don't know what an ambassador role does, but there's a deep understanding that he has of the European hockey culture and of European hockey that, maybe it grows a little bit of the European side of things in Pittsburgh, much the way that Patrick Allvin did for a little while, always bringing in the European players. Maybe if this Jágr connection pulls through, suddenly you start to see a few more Czech names appear on Penguins rosters because of that connection.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that no matter what, more Jágr is a good thing, and we've discussed that at length. But with the World Championships coming to an end, that means the only current member of the Penguins organization that you can count on for hockey is Brayden Yager of the Moose Jaw Warriors. Of course, that team has lost their first two games of the Memorial Cup in very similar fashion, going down early and then climbing back just to lose by one goal. But they do have their third game of the Memorial Cup preliminaries tonight, and then we'll see where they stand going into the knockout stages and if they can capture a Memorial Cup. Yager had a pretty good game on Friday, 2 goals in his Memorial Cup debut. We'll see what he's able to do, but that is the last remaining thread here of Penguins organizational hockey, unless you want to look at former Penguins still in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Then you got Evan Rodriguez, Chad Ruhwedel.
It's not many. It's Chad Ruhwedel, who hasn't played for the Rangers in the playoffs yet. Evan Rodriguez, if you want to count him, Dmitry Kulikov for the Panthers. Cody Ceci, pretty famously for the
Edmonton Oilers.
Yeah. And if he gets in, he probably won't. But Derek Pouliot is, I believe, a healthy scratch or a black ace or whatever it may be for the Dallas Stars. So that's the list.
A former Penguin will have a Stanley Cup ring, as it seems like it happens every single year. But at the end of the day, the only player within the organization still participating in organized hockey is Brayden Yager. So check that out later tonight. Moose Jaw Warriors close out their preliminaries at the Memorial Cup. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. And remember, you can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.